You know, when we think about science, we usually picture this steady march of progress, right? We're building on what we know, brick by brick. But what if a whole field of science was stacking up something that looked like knowledge, but wasn't? Today, we're digging into a pretty bold argument that the science of criminology might just have a science problem. And we're going to explore what it would take to build a truly solid foundation for understanding why crime happens. So let's kick things off with this really powerful metaphor. The idea is that a lot of criminological knowledge is like monopoly money in the bank. You know the feeling, right? You've got this huge stack of colorful bills, it looks amazing, you feel like you're absolutely crushing the game. But then you try to take that money out into the real world to actually, say, make a neighborhood safer or predict a crime wave, and you realize it has zero value. It's the illusion of wealth, not the real deal. And this leads to an amazing question that a criminologist named Joan McCord asked years ago. Why are there as many theories about crime as there are flavors of cheese? I mean, think about it. In a field like physics, new ideas usually replace old, less accurate ones. But here, it often feels like we're just adding more and more options to the cheese board. Here's your cheddar, your brie, your Gouda, without ever really deciding which one is the best for the job. And that's the puzzle we're trying to solve today. Okay, so let's get right into it. What exactly is this monopoly money problem? We're about to see why the field sometimes ends up with this huge pile of competing ideas instead of one single solid growing tower of knowledge. The core issue here is something called a progressive problem shift. Think of it this way. When Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, he didn't just toss Newton's physics out the window. Nope. His theory could do everything Newton's could, plus it explained a bunch of new stuff, like how gravity can bend light. The new idea basically swallowed the old one whole and then got bigger. The argument here is that in criminology, theories don't really do that. They just kind of sit next to each other and argue. All right, so if we're going to call out monopoly money, we better know what real scientific currency looks like. What's the difference between a science that's building a real fortune of knowledge and one that just keeps collecting $200 for pass and go? This table really lays it all out. A healthy progressive science sticks its neck out. It makes these big, bold predictions about things we haven't even seen yet. A degenerating science, on the other hand, is always looking backward. It's constantly patching up holes in old theories, trying to protect them from new facts. You can think of it like this. One is building a skyscraper, and the other is just frantically plugging leaks in a sinking ship. And that's the whole magic of a progressive problem shift. It's that moment when a theory stops just explaining what we already know and starts correctly predicting things we had no idea were coming. That is when you know you've just deposited some real, hard cash into the bank of science. And let's look at some of the all-stars, the Hall of Famers of this idea. Einstein didn't just say, hey, gravity's weird. He made this unbelievably specific prediction that starlight would bend by an exact amount as it passed the sun. And you know what? He was right. Kepler didn't just guess that planets move, he wrote down the precise mathematical laws that govern their orbits. The key word here is precision. These weren't just vague ideas, they were super risky bets that paid off big time. Okay, so now we have a good picture of what real scientific money looks like. So let's get to the heart of it. Why does criminology seem to have such a hard time earning it? Well, it all comes down to something the source calls the precision crisis. And here's the basic recipe for the whole problem. It's actually pretty simple. You start with a really vague theory, one that just says crime will increase or decrease, but never says by how much. Then you use statistical tests that aren't very tough. They're basically designed to find any kind of connection, no matter how tiny. And what's the result? You almost always find some kind of support, which creates this powerful illusion that you're making progress. Now, this whole situation is made so much worse by a brilliantly named concept from psychologist Paul Meehl, the crud factor. I love this. His idea is that in our incredibly complex social world, pretty much everything is connected to everything else in some small, weird way. So if you look hard enough, you are guaranteed to find a correlation between two things. This makes it way too easy for a vague theory to pass a weak test, even if the connection it finds is totally meaningless. So what does this crisis actually look like in day-to-day research? Well, it shows up as these vague predictions, statistical tests that are just too easy to pass, and honestly, researchers who tend to protect their favorite theories by blaming the data when a test doesn't go their way. This all leads to something called box score science, where people just tally up the number of studies that found a win, kind of like counting hits in a baseball game, without ever asking if all those hits actually add up to a real championship-level understanding of the world.
So let's make this super concrete. Let's see how this all played out with a perfect real-world test. The COVID-19 pandemic was this massive, unexpected social experiment, and it put one of criminology's most famous theories to the ultimate test. This was a huge moment for a big idea called routine activities theory. The theory itself is pretty straightforward. Crime happens when you get three things in the same place at the same time: a motivated offender, a suitable target, and nobody around to guard it. The pandemic lockdowns completely upended that equation overnight. People were stuck at home. Businesses were closed and empty. So the question was simple. What on earth was going to happen to crime? The answer, as it turns out, was a mess. I mean, the findings were just all over the map. Some cities saw crime plummet. Others saw certain types of crime skyrocket. And a lot of places just had mixed, confusing results. This is what imprecision looks like in action. The theory was a good starting point, but it just wasn't sharp enough to make one single clear prediction that held up everywhere. But, and this is so important, amidst all of that noise, some researchers found actual, real currency. And here's the perfect example of the difference. Instead of just asking, did crime go up or down, one study calculated a very specific number they called the mobility elasticity of crime. And they found that for every 1% drop in how much people were moving around, home burglaries dropped by a very precise 1.04%. That is a hard fact. That is a solid piece of knowledge that any theory from now on has to be able to explain. That's real money in the bank. So the goal here isn't just to tear down the field, right? It's to ask, how can we build it up stronger? How can criminology move past this precision crisis and start banking more of that real, solid, scientific currency? Well, the source material actually gives us a pretty clear roadmap. It starts with prioritizing those solid facts, like that burglary number we just saw. Then, you make the theories themselves more precise, often using math and computer models to get specific. You get better, more detailed data, and this one is crucial. You design tests that are actually hard to pass, tests that a theory could genuinely fail. And finally, you stop looking at this big soup of causes and start testing the individual ingredients to see which ones are really doing the work. And this slide makes a really important point. The goal here is absolutely not to try and turn criminology into physics. The social world is complicated and messy, and that's okay. The goal is simply for the field to become a better version of itself, a science that carefully, methodically builds knowledge, brick by solid brick, giving us all a clearer and ultimately more useful picture of a massive social challenge. And this brings us right to the final and probably most important question. Why does any of this academic stuff actually matter? Well, it matters because the policies that shape our justice system, our police departments, and our communities, they're all built on top of this science. So if that science is based on monopoly money, what is the real-world cost of getting it wrong?